Hello, friends. Saying enough didn't change how my body felt. The fear was still there. The uncertainty was still there. But what changed was this. I stopped staying at home. When my family wanted to go somewhere, I went. When my wife needed to run an errand, I went. Not because it was easy, and not because suddenly it felt ready. Just because suddenly I decided fear wasn't going to make my decisions anymore. Um, I just I decided that it was time for me to go. Now, before we go any further, I need to say this clearly. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a licensed medical professional. I've been clinically diagnosed with psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. I've also been diagnosed with complex PTSD and severe anxiety disorder. So what I share here is lived experience. It's not medical advice. So getting back to where we were, those first times leaving the house, they weren't big moments. They weren't victories. They were uncomfortable. They were not quiet. And almost every time we left, my body paid the price in the form of at least one, if not multiple seizures. My body never eased up when we left the house. And when we got home, I usually crashed. I would come home and pass out for a couple of hours. It wasn't strength, it wasn't resilience, it was depletion. My body had been all alert the entire time. And once it felt safe again at the house, it shut down. There was nothing heroic about it. It was exhausting. But I never thought about stopping. I never told myself this wasn't sustainable. I just kept going. I kept telling myself I wasn't going to let my life live within the walls of my home anymore. My family was glad to have me back out there with them. You could see it and you could feel it. But, they were still concerned. They had to adapt. They learned where to stand. They learned what to watch for, how to be ready if I had an episode. We developed a rhythm, a quiet understanding of what to do if something had happened. I wish, they didn't have to do that. But when you're living with someone with a disability, adaptation becomes part of the rhythm of life. And I'm sure most of you can understand that. But as time went on, something began to change. The duration between episodes started to grow. I took notice. Not with relief, though, not with confidence. It was more with fear because trusting that change felt risky. Like if I believed it too soon, I might lose it just as fast. So I didn't celebrate it. I watched it. I continued tracking my app, everything that I did, the episodes. I continued to track them in my app. All of them, the dates, the time, the duration. I wasn't looking for perfection. I was looking for patterns. And when I started noticing more spaces between them, I didn't test it. I didn't push it. I simply just kept going out. If my family was leaving, I went. If there was an errand to run, I went. No big speeches, no declarations, just repetition. When we went places, I kept the same routines. I never sat with my back towards the door. I never faced away from main lines of foot traffic. I positioned myself where I could exit quickly or defend my family if needed. I was always vigilant, always alert. You know, the constant vigilance, unfortunately, the always watching, always ready. That was the same state that had overloaded my nervous system in the first place. It was part of what led to the seizures. But, but, sorry, but choosing to live like this. It was more important to me than staying home and not living at all. And I knew something else had to change. And I wasn't relying on just one thing anymore. I wasn't facing this from only one direction. I was starting to support my nervous system in multiple ways, quietly, consistently, not to force it, not to rush it, but to give it a chance to learn something new. And what started to grow wasn't calm, it was awareness. And I began noticing when my body was tightening. I began noticing when my breathing shifted. I began noticing how long the vigilance lasted and when it finally began to fade. I wasn't relaxed, but I was aware, if that makes sense. So, the more we went out, the more I noticed something else happening. And between the seizures, tremors began to show up. Unsteady hands, my legs shaking. Not so much as they would be seizures, but just the trembling. The seizures were still there, just they were farther apart, but the space between them was being filled with these tremors instead. I didn't see that as progress. I didn't see it as a setback either. I just saw it as information. So I started tracking the tremors the same way I tracked the seizures: where they happened, when they happened, how long they lasted. I took note of anything that might have triggered them. Now, I wasn't trying to control what was happening, I was trying to understand it. And through all of it, the fear, the vigilance, the exhaustion, the tremors, I kept showing up. Not because it was easy, definitely not because it was fixed, but because staying inside had already taken enough from me. It had taken enough from my family. I wasn't going to go back. That's not in me. That's not who I am, and that's probably not who you are. It's not something we want to go backwards to. If this is something you feel like something has been taken from you too, your freedom, your confidence, your sense of normal, this journey might be for you as well. So join me in the next episode. This is where we begin to start talking about what's been taken and how we begin to take that next step. So just remember, you are not broken. You are not alone. Because that's something that I have to keep telling myself, is that I am not broken and that I am not alone. Together, we're going to walk through this and learn that there is a path forward. So join me in the next episode and let's get through this together.